Startup Canada National Headquarters here in Ottawa. Today is Wednesday, March 11th, and we are live here in Ottawa and broadcasting on Facebook Live and Twitter. Thank you for joining us. Now, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that our broadcast today is taking place on the traditional unceded Algonquin territory. We are so pleased to be here today for this special event. My name is Natasha Hope-Morano, and I'm Director of Corporate and Government Affairs at Startup Canada, the national rallying community and voice for Canada's 3.5 million entrepreneurs. Thank you for all joining me today, live and in studio. Now, this is the 5th consecutive year that Startup Canada is proud to host a number of events online and in startup communities across the country to celebrate the contributions of women to the Canadian economy and challenge entrepreneurs to press for progress to further unleash the economic potential for women through entrepreneurship and innovation. Please join the discussion and celebrate us online using #StartupWomen. Startup Canada's International Women's Day programming is made possible to the support of Business Development Bank of Canada, Sovereign Insurance, Scotiabank, UPS, and EDC. Thank you. Let me give them a round of applause. Now, today has been incredible. It's been a long day, and I'm proud to be part of this International Women's Day programming. We started early in the morning while we were sipping on our dainty cups of coffee, and we convened some of Canada's leading women entrepreneurs and industry leaders for an impactful meeting with Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade, Rachel Van Dayen. We discussed how small businesses, particularly those led by women and underserved groups, face pressures when pursuing global markets and how these barriers can be addressed quickly. We then proceeded to the University of Ottawa, where we spent the morning with the next generation of women leaders, inspiring them with their stories of being in high school and being inspired by their bold ambition. And through Startup Canada's Community Fund for International Women's Day, presented with Inuit, BDC, MasterCard, and Microsoft, we are thrilled to support the following events in grassroots communities across the country. Startup Sault Ste. Marie in Ontario, Startup Live in New Brunswick, Startup Surrey in BC, the International Black Economic Forum in Montreal, North Forge Technology Exchange, Loyalist College will be hosting a prolific Canadian media entrepreneur. Memorial Centre for Entrepreneurship will be hosting a female entrepreneur for a fireside chat. Volition Advisors have organized 76 pitch nights across Canada, the US, and Europe for International Women's Day. We have a lot going on. Startup Peel is hosting a Celebrate Her Stories event, and Startup Vancouver is bringing leading business women together. And we are here today, streaming live in our nation's capital to inspire, encourage, and make impactful strides forward for women entrepreneurs. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the Honourable Anita Anand, Minister of Public Service and Procurement, to the podium to deliver a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Natasha. Hello. Welcome to everyone here in the room and members of Startup Canada joining us online. Bonjour tout le monde. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais souligner que nous sommes sur le territoire non cédé des peuples algonquins. I'm delighted to be here today to celebrate International Women's Month with so many entrepreneurs. Today and every day, we must recognize and celebrate the vast achievements of women in all sectors. And we also need to reflect on how we can accelerate together women's equality globally and here at home in Canada. We have come a long way since the United Nations first started celebrating International Women's Day way back in '75. But there's still more work to be done. At Public Services and Procurement Canada, we manage the purchase of approximately $16 billion worth of goods and services every single year by doing business with thousands of suppliers and supporting thousands upon thousands of jobs right across the country. Dans mon ministère et à travers le gouvernement, notre travail ne repose pas seulement sur la nécessité d'assurer l'égalité des chances pour les Canadiennes. Nous nous sommes engagés à améliorer l'égalité des résultats pour les femmes. As Minister of Public Services and Procurement, I am focused on equality and inclusion as my department works to modernize the procurement process and increase the diversity of bidders on government contracts. Notre gouvernement comprend que la diversité est notre force. Our government understands that diversity is our strength. When it comes to procurement, diversity provides better value for Canadians. A more diverse federal supply chain is a more competitive marketplace. More top Canadian businesses vying to supply government with the best possible goods and services at the very best prices for Canadians. The potential effect of increasing the participation of women-led businesses in procurement in that context is significant. With support from the government-wide Women Entrepreneurship Strategy, the intent is to have 50% more women-owned businesses participating in federal procurement. In closing, the work that we are doing at PSBC and that I personally feel so honored to undertake is just one part of the important steps taken by our government on gender equality. From working to close the pay equity gap to addressing gender-based violence, our government is taking real action. Thank you so much for having me here today, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now just raising the microphone here because I am 6 feet tall and I don't want to have to bend down. So just bear with me when I get things all set up here. There we go. Again, thank you so much, Minister. Your passion is addicting and addictive, and we appreciate everything that you're doing with this portfolio. So to our digital viewers, remember you can join the conversation anytime using #StartupWomen. So let's begin. We have an incredible panel here today, and we're ready to dive into the conversation focused around scaling women-led companies through procurement. So today, of course, joining us is Your Honorable Anita Anand, Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Minister. We have Dr. Barbara Orser, Deloitte Professor of Management and Growth Enterprises at Telfer School of Management. Laura Didick, National Lead for We at BDC. We have Shira Baberstock, founder and CEO of Aguajo, Equal Source. Nicole Verkint, founder and CEO of OMX. And Mallory Campbell, board director at Startup Canada. What a stellar panel indeed. Now, to officially get things started, I'm going to ask each of you in 60 seconds or less, but let's keep it to 30 so we have lots of time for robust conversation, to tell us why the topic of scaling women-led companies through procurement is important to you. So why don't I start with you, Minister?
Well, as I said, procurement, the Ministry of Procurement and Public Services has $16 billion of contracts every year. We have an obligation to ensure that women are part of that process and other minority groups as well, including Indigenous managed and run businesses. And so it's incredibly important to diversify the supply chain, and that's what I'm working very hard to do.
Wonderful.
And we know that about 16% of Canadian small and medium enterprises are majority women-owned. We also know that 10% do business with the federal government. So there's an opportunity to close that gap by scaling up women and opening up contract opportunities in order to grow their firms.
Bojo, Odemenkwe Nadishnakas, Keboek Nadonjaba, Wabijesh Nadodam. As an Anishinaabe Algonquin, I'll be focusing on Indigenous women today, just to let everyone know. I'm very passionate about procurement, especially for Indigenous women. Helping Indigenous women to get into procurement means creating more jobs, more success, helping to grow Indigenous communities. So it's definitely a really great thing to focus on.
Okay, ma'am. So I'm an entrepreneur. I've started and scaled 2 businesses, and it's great to get grants. It's great to get investment. It's great to go to the bank and ask for money, but really you cannot scale, and nothing can be sustainable without contracts and work and revenue. That seems so obvious, but procurement is really, in my mind, it's really truly the sustainable thing to grow a business alongside a woman entrepreneur and to grow alongside them. That's all they really want when you talk to them. They want revenue, they want partnerships with corporations, with supply chains, with government, with whoever they'll get procurement from, as opposed to any of those other things.
So in terms of scaling, I'm going to echo a little bit of what Nicole mentioned, and I know most of us already touched on that topic, but it's really about empowering these women-owned businesses to move forward, and not just to scale, but to scale outside of Canada, but to scale within Canada first. I think it's very important that we have that opportunity here.
I mean, without being repetitive, I guess, I mean, there's lots of data that proves that companies with more diversity and do better and just are more profitable and grow better. And so we just generally need more diversity. And I think every corporation, including government, we need all of our suppliers to look like the population, to be as diverse as the Canadian population and as their employee base. So quite frankly, I just think it's important to have us all do it.
Absolutely. It really is it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. I don't know why we're talking about it.
Why are we talking about this? But we are. So I think I'm going to pose my first question in around federal procurement policy to the minister. And I'll start by asking, where do you see the biggest opportunities for improvement when it comes to the entrepreneur's experience with federal procurement policy and its implementation?
Well, what I have seen is that there is a need to continue opening up and diversifying our supply chains. And the question is, especially when we're dealing with small and medium-sized enterprises, how do you do that? And one way that my ministry has been working to improve upon is to have channels that women and other minority-run businesses can actually access. And so we have the Office of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. And this is a link between women-run businesses, minority-run businesses, and indeed any small or medium-sized enterprise to our procurement process. If you have questions, if you want clarification, those are ways in which you can access the procurement process or pose your questions. Another initiative that we are going to be launching soon is our e-procurement model. And that is an internet-based procurement system which allows greater access across the board, akin to an eBay or an Amazon, so that we can spread out and diversify those people and businesses that are seeking to become suppliers.
That's interesting. I mean, in the age of, it's a digital age now, right? So
Yes.
it's really, again, a no-brainer to do something and implement something like this.
Exactly.
Nicole, given your portfolio, let me throw that question to you. What's some of your takeaways from this and advice?
Thanks. Portfolio, I've never heard Omex called that. I like it, though.
Your portfolio.
Yeah. So I would say, as an entrepreneur first, it's obviously just very difficult to sell to government. Unless you can get on a standing offer, which it's challenging. It takes a long time. It takes money. It takes effort and time, obviously. It's very hard to get your first contract. So I don't know how long it was, maybe 5 years ago, the government introduced the BCIP program, Building Canada Innovation Program, an incredible program. I'm not sure if it's still run under PSPC. It might be under ISED now, but this is a great program. We accessed it. I know tons of companies who have accessed it. It was oversubscribed. And here's the challenge with that program is that once you get the contract, it's very difficult to get follow-on contracts. So there's no mechanism still that I know of where you can use the BCIP program for a few years, but there's no mechanism to be able to get on to something kind of quickly. So I think it's difficult in general to just sell as an entrepreneur or a small business to government. But I think we're here talking about procurement, and I think that there is an opportunity whereby I'm not sure legally what the challenges are with like setting aside a percentage to buy from women-owned businesses, but actually in procurement, so when you're sourcing from a prime contractor, have the prime contractor have a percentage where they could source from lower in the supply chain tiers from women-owned businesses. So I think there's an opportunity there, a big opportunity where, and we mentioned the dollar amounts that are being spent that can have a huge impact on the community. So those are some kind of immediate areas that I think we could make a big difference on.
Does anybody else want to interject, Barbara?
Maybe I'll sort of try and connect those two dots as well, that with a $16 billion spend and a mandate letter that says increasing the frequency of bids, I think the next level of challenge to your government will be increasing the number of contracts. Because as Nicole mentioned, bids increases activity, but it doesn't increase bottom lines. So having some kind of commitment from your government with reporting on the percentage of women-owned firms, as we define that, majority-owned, majority-controlled, to bring together the e-commerce and the actual bottom line contributions of your programs.
It is a good point that to say, how is it that we make sure we can track the number of suppliers who are women-led or Indigenous-led businesses. And certainly our e-procurement model is going to make that process much easier because that information will be contained online.
Absolutely. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that? Shara?
So the Indigenous population is approximately 4.9, so let's round up to 5% of the population. So we'd want to look at, even just Indigenous people alone, a minimum of a 5% spend, I would say the public and the private sectors. But because we're talking about women, should there be a percentage set aside as well for Indigenous women to make sure that there's enough representation of Indigenous women in that 5% spend? Absolutely. So I just wanted to mention that. And then in terms of your question, there's two things that really came to mind. One was the importance of relationship building. I mean, just to share a story, our company didn't really start getting into procurement, like actually applying for bids and being successful for bids for the last 2 years. And what actually opened up that gateway was relationship building and a lot of networking with the government, with public sector and private sector. And now we've been very successful with procurement. But I would say there's a bit of a communications challenge. There's a lot of information already available online, but it can be challenging to navigate that and overwhelming, just the amount of information. I think it would be really great to have a very strong concierge service to help navigate that space, especially for Indigenous women entrepreneurs or just women entrepreneurs, to have a concierge to help you walk through the best resources. And specifically for Indigenous people, because we really are very face-to-face cultures, making sure that relationship building is an ongoing thing. So there's been some really great engagement about a lot of the different files in government. So I'll commend the government for some really great engagement. But it shouldn't just come up before policy is being created. It should be ongoing and every single year. So meeting every single year to find out how is it going? How is the implementation of the policy going? Is this working for you? Are there still challenges, and what can we do to improve? So really developing those relationships and also having really good partnerships with Indigenous organizations and companies that could be that could help you to cross-promote. So it might be difficult to get the word into, more rural communities or remote ones. They may not have access to the internet, or it might be slow. But if you can have people on the ground that already have those connections and help to feed the information of these great opportunities through those key contacts, then you can get the word out.
Nicole, did you want to?
Yeah, just a quick comment on the definition of women-owned and women-led. I know we've been hearing that a few different times, and I just kind of thinking about that. I'm a pretty unusual situation to have women owned necessarily. A lot of the startups that you'd be working with at Startup Canada, if they're fast growing, high growth, they've raised a whole bunch of capital, venture capital in particular, I think that we should also acknowledge the women-led businesses that have been raising capital and don't necessarily have the 51% ownership.
I think you're absolutely right. We've touched on themes of tracking aspect, relationship building, and the importance of that, networking, cross-promotion. I'm going to push the question even further now, and I'm going to ask about recommendations. So what recommendations do you have for the government, and how can it, through procurement modernization, further support success and competitiveness of women-led companies and those led by underrepresented groups? So maybe I'll throw that question to you, Melanie. Sure. With your experience, I mean, you've been with Startup Canada really since inception, so
Yes.
since basically 2012. Mm-hmm. And so what have you seen? I mean, you're active in the community of Peel. But tell me more about your experience and what you've seen throughout the years.
So my personal experience in traveling with, say, business women in trade missions is that in Canada, we need to incorporate a type of diversity spend. So by putting a number on companies that have to say whether it has to be, 30%, they need to put out, so their bids need to have at least 30% representation from women-led companies, women-owned companies, and also underrepresented companies. So that individual, that corporation may not win that bid, but we need to see some traction there. And we need to be able to account for that in terms of KPIs, because even modeling after something that's similar that's in the US, where they have a minority and diversity inclusion project, where companies fall into that. They subscribe to this, but there is tracking on that, and there is a requirement for them to meet that every year. So that way, I know Shara had mentioned about checking in yearly on it. Mm-hmm. That's a good way to actually, in terms, track KPIs on that. And then make sure that women are actually, they're putting in for those bids. And if they're not, find out why they're not. Is it because it's not clear enough, or do they need assistance? Do they need direction, or do they need direction to find it? So those are some of the things I'd like to touch on that. So.
And as basic as that sounds, the why and the how. I mean, those are fundamental to the discussions that we've been having all day. So that's why conversations like this are so important. So we thank all of you for tuning in to join us for this live stream. To you, Laura.
And just to add to that, I completely agree. As far as that, like having the KPIs and then holding them accountable, I think is really important, and find out the why. And I think, it's leading by example, but it's showing corporations the benefit of having a supplier diversity program, because it should not only be a requirement. There's huge benefits to it, and again, the research has shown that it's just good for Canada and good for the Canadian economy. So it comes back to the no-brainer, and so I think we need to continue to remind corporations and government of that, and have the KPIs, and then hold them accountable for those measurements.
Absolutely.
Can I just respond?
Absolutely.
The minister.
Yes. Please do.
I will say that our government has made great strides in seeking to diversify the supply chain, and actually to showing a firm commitment to doing so. I was appointed on November 20th, 2019, so just 4 months ago. And I will say that this is one of my main commitments, that as a visible minority woman myself, who believes that we succeed as a group, as a collectivity, when women succeed, I am personally committed to diversifying the supply chain, to ensuring that that is a message that resonates through my entire department and ministry, and to ensure that we do actually ensure that women and visible minorities and Indigenous women, who are a subset of Indigenous people, are all able to access the supply chain. And as I said, we are putting in place, and in fact have in place, a mechanism by which, if women need to pose questions regarding how to access a particular contract or participate in a procurement, they're able to do so through our Office of Small and Medium Enterprises. So there's no question we are on it.
And we thank you so much for your leadership. In 4 months, look what you've accomplished. So we're excited about what's in store. Barbara, do you want to speak to some of the numbers around this, or?
Well, I think I mentioned a key number, and that's not representative of the population of women-owned firms, but I also did want to bring up the issue of certification, that as we build opportunities for diverse entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, Indigenous peoples, there is value, I think, in certification, and having the federal government support those organizations that are making this happen. If not, the onus of cost and responsibility falls on business owners with little in terms of inaugural capital often. And as well, we know through the U.S. Government Accountability Office, there's very high level of fraud in the U.S. for self-certification. So I guess one of my takeaways would be to make sure that we're building the infrastructure that will enable the government to enact the policies, Minister, that you're working so hard to push through.
I'm going to pose a question to you specifically, Laura. and that is, what opportunities are there for entrepreneurs, industry, and government to really work together to increase that supplier diversity?
Well, I think it takes all of us and the whole and all of us to get into the conversation. I mean, the onus is not on government, it's not on corporations, it's not on the women entrepreneur. I think it's collectively we all make a commitment and work together and make commitments, even corporations to make commitments on the benefits of a supplier diversity program and to purchase from diverse suppliers and the great organizations that certify these underserved markets. I think are very important, but it's also very important for them to work together to make sure that it's easier for all entrepreneurs to become certified, to differentiate themselves amongst each other as to which certification they should get, and then for the corporation, like a one-stop shopping almost, so they know which to go to, and because sometimes it can get very costly for both, and it can get a little confusing, I think. So I think there's an opportunity right there.
I've got a little bit of 2 and 3. I wanted to talk about the importance of procurement readiness trainings for Indigenous women entrepreneurs. There's several Indigenous women entrepreneurs that would be ready to tap into procurement if they just had a little bit of training on how to do that and getting the skills that they need. For instance, looking at how to effectively look for procurement opportunities and how to bid and proposal writing. I wanted to talk about the importance of Indigenous-led. That's really important. So, for example, with Aguajo, we have offices in Canada and Australia, and our third co-founder, who's Maori, actually led a procurement readiness program for Australian Indigenous business owners and got them procurement ready. So I'd love to see more of that in Canada and having it be Indigenous-led procurement readiness training. So I think that's very important. And being able to support Indigenous trade missions. So there's really great opportunities, for example, to be able to go to places like Australia and New Zealand and making sure that Indigenous business owners have the ability and the support to be able to go on trade missions and to remove the barriers. I know, for instance, you can get funding to be able to support that type of trade mission. I know that it's available. I know that you can get up to 75% of your trip covered, but I also know you have to pay everything up front, and that can be very expensive. And a lot of Indigenous women entrepreneurs or just Indigenous entrepreneurs just might not go because of that. So how do we remove those barriers? And then in terms of all of government and industry, private, public sector working together, putting them all in the room, doing things like design thinking sessions to work on the challenges and co-creating together solutions is really exciting. And I've also received some really good feedback, by the way, on reverse trade shows. So when you're working with underrepresented populations or Indigenous women, have it the other way around, where the Indigenous entrepreneurs get to walk around to the booths and talk to you.
I like that idea, the reverse trade show, that we're filing that away. We have our big startup day on the Hill in October, so there's a little plug for that, and stay tuned. So the official theme for International Women's Day this year is Each for Equal. And so I want to ask each of you, how are you helping create a gender equal world? And how can others, perhaps even the younger generation, join this movement? Maybe I'll start with you, Minister.
Well, when I think about procurement practices, I think about a triangle. I think about the government as the agency to effect procurement at one of the points in the triangle, suppliers at the other point, and the third point is customers. And those customers represent the entire Canadian population. And what we need to do is diversify our supply chain to ensure that the suppliers actually look like a subset of the Canadian population, so that the benefits of procurement are distributed among the Canadian population. Part and parcel of my saying that we do $16 billion worth of contracting a year means that there are thousands upon thousands of jobs that are created as a result of those contracts. And so my efforts are directed towards broadening out the supply chain for the benefit of the entire Canadian population.
Okay. And I think I speak to academe. I think our role is ensuring that when leaders are making decisions, that you have good evidence-based policy so that we move beyond anecdotes, we move beyond perceptions, and we make sure we're drilling down into the right areas of investment. So I think that's our role in academia, as well as ensuring academic founders are well supported, and we build out financial literacy programs, procurement literacy programs, and share that both within our post-secondary institutions but within the larger ecosystem.
I think you really touched on something with the financial literacy piece. I think is crucial, especially for the younger generation, and you're seeing more and more programs available for even younger generation of up-and-coming academics to understand just the fundamentals of that.
And to that, last week Scotiabank released a report on financial knowledge and financial literacy, and an important takeaway there is women are significantly more likely to fall within the those that perceive themselves to have limited financial confidence and knowledge as it relates to small business finance. So I think those are the kind of things we need to drill down on and improve in terms of training.
I have 2 points. First of all, we can't have equality without equity. So understanding what the challenges are and addressing them. And 2, an article came out recently showing that most people, including women, have a bias towards women. So we really need to work on that because if there's a bias and we're fighting against that, then that's going to create issues.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to take the minister's triangle and I'm going to add a ladder to the bottom of it. So all to say that I think a huge piece of the pie, as in 80% of the stuff that we don't see, is below the water. It's the suppliers of suppliers. And we like it or we don't like it, a lot of women-run businesses are smaller businesses. They don't tend to be the big contractors that win the big infrastructure projects directly, but they tend to be the suppliers of the suppliers, so tier 2 suppliers. So I'll just say that I think that there's a huge opportunity that lives kind of lower down in the supply chains that might not be something the government buys directly from. Just something to remember that I think, the work the WBE is doing, the B2B connections, I think there's a huge opportunity there to connect women-led, women-owned, Aboriginal-owned, all these other diverse that tend to be smaller businesses within the supply chain lower down.
I like that ladder analogy.
Now I'm going to turn to water. Holding us screwed up.
Picture a pool and then a triangle pool and a ladder.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm also going to take into consideration something Nicole had mentioned as well too. So I'm following you as well
Oh, okay.
today.
Let's go. Let's
But
add to this.
yeah, no, because when we look at procurement and we look at training, so that's another thing. Looking at how to write bids, how to basically respond to those, and then you had also mentioned in terms of really working together, because tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, many of women-owned business or women-led businesses, they don't fall into that. They're below that, as you mentioned. So, and really we have to learn how to, or basically encourage them to partner. So when you partner, you're actually creating a stronger company where you can go in and bid confidently to secure that deal.
And the only thing I would add is that in my travels across Canada, the one thing I notice is that magic happens when women come together and women leaders come together. And so I think as a group, we all need to support each other, and we need to really profile and highlight and celebrate all those great women-owned and women-led businesses. And sometimes they don't profile themselves enough and beat their own chest, so we need to do it for them, and we need to talk about them.
You're absolutely right. Magic certainly does happen when you have a group of powerful women together, and it's truly been magical today. We've had such an incredible day, and I'm so pleased to be able to be here today to lead this discussion. Now, in the matter of time, I'm trying to stick to as close of a timeline as possible. So I'm going to wrap things up by posing one final question to our esteemed panelists, and we're going to appeal to more of the soft side now. So scale things back. So in 30 seconds or less, leave our viewers with a piece of advice of inspiration for young women looking to pursue entrepreneurship. 60 seconds or less. I'm counting. Not really.
As a university professor and a mother of 4 children, 3 of whom are girls, I am in contact with our youth every single day. And I will say that the most important message that I would give to women, young and old, is to keep going. We need you. We need your participation. We need your efforts. We need your skills that are so important in all walks of life in our society. Don't stop. Keep going for the benefit not only of yourselves, but also the greater Canadian society. We need you.
I feel like those could be lyrics to a beautiful song.
And bring your girlfriend with you. Yes. And I think touch base with your local community small business support organizations. We have in Canada world-class training organizations that are funded by our federal government, and Engaging Startup Canada. There are some at the universities. So just tap into the infrastructure. You might be pleasantly surprised to see the support that's available for you.
In 2013, before I launched my business, I never saw myself as an entrepreneur, and I was terrified of public speaking. And so I just want to, and I was very, very shy. The reason I woke up and all of a sudden got into business is because I realized I had a real passion and I wanted to make a difference, and no one was going to stop me, and I was going to start with a project. And here in 2020, I'm in business, and I've really grown very confident. So if there's any women that are interested in making a difference, taking on some social issue or environmental issue, something that you're really excited about, go for it. If you're shy, if you're not confident, you will grow into those shoes and surround yourself with people that will help you to get there. You can do it.
Laura?
I mean, completely agree with that. So I guess entrepreneurship is an option, is what I would say. And having 2 teenage daughters, I say that a lot. It's a great option, and the just do it. The Nike is everything's possible, I guess, and we need to support each other to do it.
For me, I'd just say walk confidently. Really just believe in yourself and find a support group. So, as I said earlier, find your tribe and just support each other.
Okay, I'm going to do double negatives. So the 2 things I always hear from young entrepreneurs is, I would love to be an entrepreneur, but I don't have an idea. That's the first thing. And the other people that do have an idea say, I want to be an entrepreneur and I have a great idea, but I don't want to tell anybody the idea. So my number 1 advice is that as soon as you have an idea, I think you need to tell absolutely everybody, because you're going to need to collaborate with everybody. You're going to need to work with every organization under the sun to get something off the ground. It's like no entrepreneur does something on their own. So that's the first piece of advice. And the second one is, if you don't have an idea, I think that you need to just start and partner with organizations in an area that you're really passionate about. So if you're really passionate and all you know about is tennis, then you focus on that and work with those organizations. And as you're kind of in the mud, you start to come up with an idea, and the idea starts to iterate. So I think you basically have to get on the ice if you want to score. And those are kind of my 2 things.
Well, this afternoon we were at the university working with kids that were in grade, I think it ranged from grade 8 to grade 9 and grade 10. And some of these ideas that they had were just absolutely amazing. There's so many bright minds out there, and I think the role of mentorship, connecting, being able to have a network around you to rely on them when you need that extra little bit of support and motivation to just hold your head a little bit taller and higher. And I was saying earlier, I'm 6 feet, and something that I've had to grow into. And being this height since I was 13, there was a lot of pressure. And so as I started to cultivate my own inner confidence, I started to hone it and own my height. And now I don't mind wearing, a 3-4 inch heel. I have a joke that, I can change your light bulbs for you. So my head's probably chopped off in the live stream right now because I'm so tall. But it's because of the network that I had, the role of mentorship and just owning that confidence. And again, to Melanie's point about being part of a tribe. We're all in this together, and we need to push it forward. And under the leadership that the minister and some of the initiatives that you're taking, we are going to get there. I feel confident that we're going to get there. So we have about 5 minutes or so left. So maybe I'll throw the opportunity out to the audience to pose a question. This is your time to ask our esteemed panelists a question. No questions. Okay, here we go. Perfect.
I'm going to ask Minister. Is there a timeline around diversifying federal procurement supply chain? And if yes, what does it look like? Because we've been hearing about, diversification for many, many years, about 7 years right now. So is there any timeline? Are there any targets?
That's a great question, and it also tracks some of the comments that were made earlier surrounding KPIs and making sure that we can actually track our progress. The requirement for me to think about diversification is really central to my ministry, and one of the things I'm going to be ensuring that we do is to develop our KPIs, to develop a timeline, to develop a reporting mechanism so that we can come back and track our progress in this area. It starts with a commitment, which we have, and we will grow that commitment to include tracking signals along the way. So thank you so much.
Any further questions? Well, then I think we're going to be ahead of schedule, which is lovely. So it now gives me great pleasure to turn the podium over to Startup Canada's Executive Director, Kayla Isabel, who will officially conclude today's session.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you everybody who's tuning in live, and thank you to our incredible panelists today. I know it's been a very busy day for many of you, engaging in our programming since 7 a.m. this morning. So we've had fantastic conversations around exporting and supporting women who are interested in going global. We've been talking about procurement. We've been talking about infrastructure and communities and how we can support women through their entrepreneurial journey, looking at many different sort of key themes. So I appreciate all the diversity of thought that you're bringing and engaging. Minister, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here today. So thank you and welcome to the Startup Canada family. To everybody who is tuning in live, thank you so much for joining us. We encourage everybody to share this live broadcast as an additional education opportunity within your organizations. We'll be sharing the live video recording as a webinar type format. We will also continue the conversation this evening. We will be doing an evening reception on the Hill, and we'll be capturing that via social media. So we look forward to keeping the conversation going on social media and through more discussions with our panelists. So thank you again. Thank you to our live audience here today. And thank you to everybody tuning in online as well. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Minister. Are you at U of O? I'm U of O in Telford. My daughter's eat all day and then
Yeah, it is so hot in here.
So I sent a proposal to do a financial literacy type event, and
we have two